and Paul Catalina's top 5. Let's start with this one. Notre Dame quarterback Tyler Buchner has entered the transfer portal. Hartman, the quarterback there from Wake Forest, Buchner is a pretty good player. And you wonder, and when you see some of the initial, what about Alabama? What about maybe Auburn? What about some? Because he's obviously a pretty good player, but did not win the job over Sam Hartman, and Tyler Buchner is now in the transfer portal.
Yeah, John Hammond on the chat room says he's visiting Alabama today. I've not heard that yet, but if that's true, kind of, leads into the, a little rumors that maybe they were looking for somebody with more veteran presence. Tyler Buchner got hurt very early in the year last year and didn't play for a long time, played in the bowl game and looked really good for Notre Dame. He's got a lot of potential, but Notre Dame wants to strike where the iron's hot, and that's why they went and got Sam Hartman out of the portal. Sam Hartman and Notre Dame were a great fit. Tyler Buchner becomes maybe not the best overall player in the portal, but he certainly is now the most sought after because he's a quarterback who has a ton of upside and he has a ton of eligibility remaining. So that is kind of a double whammy when it comes to picking somebody up. And I would think that there are 2 other schools in the SEC, Auburn and Florida, that would really love to get a visit from him. And I guess we'll see if that happens. But Tyler Buchner could certainly at least upgrade the forecast for a couple teams if he does, in fact, go there.
Offensive coordinator at Alabama is Tommy Rees. Yep. He was at Notre Dame, so there's also that connection. Craig?
Yeah, I mean, he didn't beat out Sam Hartman, but that's what you were hoping for if you were Notre Dame. I mean, that would have been a bad situation, I think, to have had this highly heralded pickup, and then he's unable to beat out the guy who was your guy last year. So, I mean, that worked out the way it was supposed to in South Bend. And, oh, boo-hoo, Tyler Buchner doesn't get to start at Notre Dame. He'll probably just now go sign $1 million NIL deal with any number of national championship contenders. So that's his prize for finishing second place in Notre Dame's quarterback competition. So hard to hate that too much for him, although obviously he wanted to be the guy for the Irish, didn't win the job, and so not a bad option to then go into the transfer portal and probably make yourself a bit of scratch and potentially start for a team like Alabama. Obviously, as you mentioned, there's others involved or that could be involved that would make sense, but Alabama's quarterback spot has been a big talking point all spring of just the fact that they don't feel clearly like they have the guy, or at least that's just the vibes that have been sent out from Nick Saban in Tuscaloosa, that there's constantly been this sort of chatter about them making a move in the portal. So certainly seems like they'll be one of those teams lined up, especially because of the Reese factor that you mentioned. Auburn would make a lot of sense as well. Florida, as Paul said, and I'm sure there's some others too that the chat room can chime in on, but all that to say, he lost the starting quarterback job in Notre Dame. It could be one of the best things that ever ends up happening to him, quite frankly. I mean, at least as far as finishing out his college career. So we'll see. But, that's a big name and certainly the biggest quarterback this go-around because there was such a, outpouring of guys in December after the season wrapped up into January. But as far as the post-spring part that we're now entering, this is the big splash of the spring period.
What would that say? Now, he's good. He played a couple of games. He got hurt against Marshall. He then came back and played against South Carolina in the Gator Bowl and played well, 3 touchdowns. He threw 3 interceptions. He's pretty good. What would that say if Alabama reaches out to him with Milroe and Ty Simpson? Is that like, man, because you heard some reports, again, I wasn't at the game, did not watch the game, that Alabama's quarterbacks were erratic in their spring game.
Yeah, I do think, you saw how Alabama played when Bryce Young went out last year. There was a drop-off, and usually in the Nick Saban era, there hasn't been much of a drop-off. The other guy goes out, and you can see that, next year they'll be just fine. This is the part where it dips off, and maybe for the first time in over a decade, Nick Saban feels a little bit of outside pressure. And nobody's going to put more pressure on Nick Saban than he puts on himself, but look, Georgia's won 2 national championships in a row and does not look like they're going anywhere. It doesn't. They're reloading and they're outspending everybody when it comes to recruiting. So if you're Nick Saban and I don't know if he's towards the end of his coaching career, but I would say that he doesn't have as long left as Kirby Smart does. If you want to, have the last decade of your coaching career be as good as it can be, you can't let somebody lap you. And George is lapping everybody right now. So, yeah, you're probably not going to have as much room for error as you did before. And if those guys aren't ready to go, then they're not ready to go. They almost lost to, with Milroe starting, almost lost to a very mediocre A&M team last year.
Yeah, they did win the bowl game handily when they beat Kansas State the way they did in the Sugar Bowl. Go ahead.
Well, they should. I mean, they should be beating Kansas State. K-State would have liked to have kept that game closer, but even with Alabama's struggles, we're looking at a program that Chris Kleiman's been building up for a couple years versus this dynasty that Nick Saban's had for well over a decade now at this point. So, that wasn't really all that surprising of an outcome, but even still, if they're not, strong at quarterback, that will be the first time in what seems like quite a long while where they haven't had much of a sure thing. I mean, sure, there's been debates like Tua and Jalen Hurts and who's better and all that, but it was never a question of how good is the actual guy. You always knew that whoever it was, whoever they picked at any moment was going to be a pretty good player, I feel like. And I think this is the first time that you're like, why do they not have a dude, like a number one overall pick dude in the room right now, or at least not ready right now. So it is a little bit of a different territory, but yeah, I understand Tommy Rees and why Alabama is so attractive and why that would be a great landing spot for him. But, like I said, there's various other teams that are also probably looking for quarterbacks at this moment, and we already mentioned a couple of them in the SEC alone, and that might be easier to win those starting jobs than it would be in Tuscaloosa still. No matter what the thought process might be, we got to remember how high the bar is in Alabama for that job. So, yeah, I think Bama makes a lot of sense, but I don't think that that'll by any means be the only person or program that puts their name in the hat.
Yeah, and this is a little bit different, but Texas, when they won in 2005, and then they went, they had this run of where you looked around the state and you're like, okay, who is going to catch these guys? They are just, Mac was hitting on everything for a while.
That's why you win a national championship.
Yeah, so they were hitting on everything, and you lose a game at the end, but overall, it's really hard to win a national championship. So the fact that he'd done it and was always in contention, that's where you really want to be. Well, Nick Saban is now in that period where he has controlled the SEC for long enough that now, in the subsequent years, everybody's hiring people to beat specifically Nick Saban.
Sure.
And so now you've got the best assistant he's ever had in Kirby Smart, beating him at every turn now, and they're winning back-to-back national titles. LSU, which was always a threat but disorganized, guess what? They've got a coach that's organized now. Tennessee was in the wilderness, and now they've got a real athletic director and looks like a real head coach for the first time in a very long time. And so you've got those three around you where you can't just assure that you're going to be the top one every single year. Yeah, you're probably going to make moves that you maybe would not have made in the previous couple of years.
Couple of other college football